And what we found is that over 50% of our students now do work in rural areas around the country. What that means is that nearly 50% don't. And our rural communities are very happy with that. They're very happy that they're getting more than 50%, and others are getting that experience, and they're going back to the city, knowing that potentially in 10 years' time, they may then be ready to come and have a rural experience as part of their work, or they may not. But the rural community does feel part of the big picture of training. What's different about that training in Australia? What do we see? And I'd be interested to hear. I'm sort of going to say a few of these things that I'd like, if possible, for you to reflect back on, yeah, that makes sense to me, or no, it's actually totally different here to that. Never thought of that before. So just think about that. What we saw that was different was two things. One, that the students got to know their supervisors as people, not just as a profession. So instead of sort of, if I was your supervisor, I would just come in to the teaching environment, go out, and you might know my name, but it would probably be as Professor Worley, and not necessarily even Paul, but it'd be Professor Worley. But you wouldn't know where I lived. You wouldn't know who was in my family. You wouldn't know what I did outside of my role as a professor. And you would never see me in a situation where I didn't know what to do, or where I admitted that I needed to find out from somebody else what to do because I was the expert. So they saw their professors, their doctors, their nurses, their allied health professionals as people over time. And that became far more motivating to them and far more real. It made the profession more real. So. But secondly, and probably even more importantly, they saw their patients. Do you use the word patients, or do some of you use the word clients? Is it okay if I use patients? No, throw tomatoes at me for using clients or anything like that. So they saw their patients as people as well. So rather than seeing the patient as an example of a disease or a condition to be learnt, they saw them as a person who needed help, who needed healing. They didn't just see that person though in the clinic or in the bed, they also saw that person down the street. So they started getting this concept of the fact that patients aren't always sick. You know, patients aren't always disabled. The things that we call patients outside of our clinic room actually are what make the world go round. They're civic leaders, they're shopkeepers, they're teachers, they're parents, they're children of parents. They're all of those things. And suddenly that gave far more meaning to what they were learning, because they were learning to help rehabilitate somebody, not just so that they could find out that their quadriceps function had improved by 17%, but so that person could climb the stairs to get to work. And the fact that they could climb the stairs to get to work meant that the butcher's shop reopened and people could buy their meat from the butcher's shop because that person happened to be the butcher. So there was all of this sort of meaning that was added to their learning. And what we found when we studied people was that the students in the rural areas were spending a whole lot more time in their study than the students in the city. Students in the city actually wanted to get away from the clinic as soon as possible for one of two reasons. Either because they wanted to prepare for their exams, and they felt the best way they could prepare for their exams was reading books rather than being with patients, And all of your teachers will say it's the opposite, that you actually want to be with patients, not with books, to prepare for your exams. Well, the second was just to get on and do other things, because they were finding just observing stuff quite boring and not stimulating. So we found that students actually in the rural areas found it much easier to develop relationships with their supervisors and with their patients. And those relationships were what made it real, what made it motivating, and what made the difference between what were often quite average students going into the rural clinical school came out as top students. Average is a strange word in the health professions, isn't it? Because none of you are average to get into your course in the first place. To get into the courses that you're in, you have to be the smart kids. My wife keeps my feet on the ground, and she says that in my profession, to get into medicine, you have to be somewhere on the spectrum. It's just a matter of how far along the spectrum you are as to whether you're realised as being odd within medicine or normal within medicine. I would say that it's similar in many of the health professions, that you have to have some of that focus and that intensity that we would, in other people, diagnose as being, as part of the spectrum. We all still, as human beings, have a need to connect, despite whether we are on the spectrum or not. We have that need to connect, and we have that need to see meaning in our work. And I've learned that students are desperate to see meaning in their work. In fact, when you do studies of most health profession students, they come in to their study very idealistic about what they can achieve as students and what they can achieve as professionals. And they leave it far more cynical about what they're going to be able to achieve. Well, we again saw the opposite in our students. We saw that students who came in with ideals about how they could make a difference in the community through what they were going to learn actually left the rural clinical school even more convinced about what sort of a difference they were going to be able to make. And again, that's motivating them to learn. Probably enough talking from me. But I just wanted to say those things to give you a bit of a picture of why a doctor from a small country town wanted to become a dean eventually. I actually didn't when I was a small country town doctor. It was the last thing in my mind. And in fact, I often tell the story of when I moved from being, clinicians will probably sympathise with this, when I had my interviews to become an academic at the university, being a doctor, and I had interviews at 2 different universities at the same time. They both wanted me, they were so desperate. One of them was purely an interview. The other one, I had to give a seminar, a presentation and an interview. So I promptly withdrew my application from the one that I had to give a seminar at, because I had no idea how to give a seminar. I was a rural doctor. I wasn't an academic. And yet, through the privilege of working with students, working with rural communities, working with clinicians, have been able to be given the trust by the whole school to take the leadership of the whole school. And it's not a rural school. The main body of our campus is in a place similar to Tigerberg Hospital. It's an academic health science centre, very research intensive. In order to get to this position, I've had to do my PhD. I've done an MBA. I've become a fellow of the Australian Academy of Health Sciences. So again, just because you're rural doesn't mean you're dumb. And it doesn't mean that you can't be at the top of the tree in terms of academia as well as practice quality. There's the opportunity to have a very academic life, if you ever want to have that, and I can talk to you about it. I can try and dissuade you if you ever want to be an academic. But there are those opportunities now that you can have, and in many ways coming out here is a first step, potentially, in having that sort of quality in your career. So, I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of me. Husband of one, father of four now, have 7 children, because 3 of them are married, and we have 4 grandchildren, and we all live in the same town. And that town is the city of Adelaide. Many people would call it a country town because it's only 1 million people in world terms, but it's very much a city for me. And I live there and work there, and my family is there, and that's one of the reasons that I'm still in that place. It's fantastic. So, why are you guys here? How do you find the teaching here? What motivates you to get out of bed and turn up to the wards or to the clinic? What could Stellenbosch do better? What about the exams? All of those sort of things. You have got some of your teachers around here. I should have told them to get lost. You could have told me different things. But one thing sorry, that's an Australian thing. I'm not trying to be rude. Telling people to get lost. But one thing I have actually found here is that the staff here at this campus actually want your feedback to improve things. And because it's a smaller place, the chances of your feedback actually getting taken and used are pretty high. Not only for this place, but we're starting to see what happens here influencing what's happening elsewhere across the other campuses as well. So it can be a way of, well, if you can make something change here, potentially that may also help change things elsewhere around.